Welcome to the Fast Mode podcast series. I'm Tara Neal, and with me today is Vijay Anand, Senior Vice President at Cognizant. Cognizant helps companies modernize technology, reimagine processes, and transform experiences so they can stay ahead in a fast-changing world. In his role, Vijay drives AI-led business transformation amidst hyper-personalization and the convergence of telecom services to reimagine customer experience for telcos. Cognizant was recently recognized as a winner of the Fast Mode Awards 2025, taking home the Analytics and Intelligence Champion Award for performance. Welcome, Vijay. Great to have you on today's episode.
Thank you, Tara. It's a pleasure to meet you. And I want to say a special hello to your listeners as well.
Okay, great. All right, I'm sure that our audience are excited to learn more about the win, especially the solution that brought you guys the championship. So, without further ado, let's dive into some of the questions that we have. The first one being, with various rapidly evolving AI and agentic AI use cases, what is Cognizant doing differently to help telcos scale analytics and intelligence from pilots to real business impact?
Sure, Tara. We have reinvented ourselves as an AI builder company. And so we don't integrate AI in telcos, we actually build it. Now, what I mean by that is if you look at the CapEx investments that telcos have done, they have spent billions of dollars on AI infrastructure. Our job is to find out how do I take that value that resides in the infrastructure and translate that into the business, whether it is network operations, business operations, and other key areas of strategic growth for telcos. Now, I call this gap as the velocity gap, and this gap is the difference between pilot and enterprise scale production. Now, to fulfill this gap, we do three things differently. Number one, we reimagine the business process. In this whole rush to deploy and agents across the enterprise, if you deploy an agent on a broken process, you actually don't fix the process. You end up automating the failure. And guess what? It's faster at scale, and you also leave an audit trail. And so that's why pilots fail, right? Not because that AI was wrong, but they fail because nobody redesigned the workflows that are around it. And a good analogy for your listeners would be you cannot put a rocket engine in a horse-drawn cart and say that this is a spaceship. You have to design the workflows around it. Secondly, I would say um, this is the most critical part, is what I call as building the harness. Agents actually are easy to build, but building enterprise grade agents are not. What that means is it's not about buying the model. It's about how do you build the evals, the observability, the guardrails, the trust, the governance, and how do you design for human in the loop from day one, right? That is what actually is the moat for the telco. So you buy the model, but you keep the harness. And that is what we deliver for our clients. And last but not the least, this is also about workforce transformation. So if you read, for example, our CEO has articulated how we are as a company transforming our workforce to build around frontier certified engineers, frontier certified business operators, and how we are enabling our own workforce so we can deploy these agents at scale, and then also train our clients to see how they can effectively and efficiently use agentic solutions to transform their enterprise. So I would say these are the three things that we do differently. And our differentiation always has been playing in the cusp of technology and domain. So what we do is we package all of these around business outcomes, and we own the outcome at scale. So let me give you a few examples of this, right? In an earlier world, telcos would not touch their legacy mainframe applications. Today, I have telcos where we are modernizing their mainframe environments, but we own the MIPS reduction and we own retiring of the legacy infrastructure. that then self-funds the mainframe modernization business case. So think of a self-funded business case, right? Likewise, in other areas like field operations, we are now signing up for eliminating truck rolls that go into the house of the customer, right? So these are good examples of how we are scaling agentic AI, doing it differently, and how customers have started adopting at scale.
Mm-hmm. Wow, interesting. I guess, you summarized, the three areas that, in these AI and agentic AI deployments and use cases would be, I would say, foundational criteria. So you've mentioned about, reimagining the processes and putting in place the guardrails and also transforming the workflows, which is basically, that those are the most important things before you basically, like what you rightly pointed out, just it's not just about getting the model, but getting the foundation elements correct, right in the first place. So, moving on from that, we talked about these AI and agentic AI. So, how are these capabilities translating into real changes in customer engagement and experience for telcos? You did share some examples earlier on the truck roll.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, Tara, right? When we think of customer experience, for most listeners, including some of us, we think it is the contact center, but actually it is not, right? To me, CX is about every touch point a customer never thinks about until it breaks. So in my own mind, I framed the problem statement of experience into two components, right? One is the visible customer experience, so this is what the customer touches, feels, and there is also the invisible customer experience, which are things that they never do, right? And let me elaborate on this a little more. When you think of visible customer experience, we have to look at not just the contact center, but look at the entire value chain. So let me give you an example. Let's take a telco, right? We start with customer acquisition. So Tara is a new prospect and she wants to sign up with, let's say, a particular telco, right? During the prospecting phase, right? My job as putting, agentic AI is to proactively guess the context and then make you a more contextual offer, right? Instead of generically throwing some numbers and offers at you, right? So that contextualization to then deliver, let us say, 18% uplift in digital sales conversion is a good example of what touches the customer right during prospecting phase. And then once you convert the customer, you get into provisioning and you get into care. We spoke about the field services example in the last question, right? So to me, if we are not able to, let's say, eliminate the truck roll, how do I arm my field technician with the right kind of analytics and insights using agentic AI? So when he or she turns up to Tara's house, he's spending the bare minimum time at your home. I mean, end of the day, the we are letting a stranger into your house, and it is my accountability as the telco that I put the necessary least amount of time required for the technician to spend at your home, right? And then you can then reduce, for example, repeat truck rolls is the business metric we want to improve. Then you can extend that conversation to billing disputes. I mean, most of the times we reach out to a telco operator because my billing doesn't feel right, and there's an opportunity to reduce that by 35-40%. And last but not the least is the lifetime value of the customer, right? How do I continue engaging with the customer throughout his lifetime and reduce, let's say, churn by, let's say, 20%, right? These are real metrics that we are seeing in the industry, and this is what I call as the visible CX.
Yep, absolutely. Especially, when we look at telcos business models, right? They are now looking at, maximizing customer lifetime value. And it's difficult if you're going to do that manually. You're going to run through all the analytics and intelligence manually, trying to come up with decisions. You're using humans instead of machines. But when you have agentic AI capabilities and AI capabilities, this would be autonomous. And that would mean you can do this at scale. And really, it really helps operators because you're dealing with millions and millions of subscribers.
Yeah. I also want to add, right? So with the visible CX is, to your point, is what the customer sees, right? And to me, there is also the invisible customer experience, which is the experience that they never see, right? And it is so important for the lifetime value of the customer because for 100 years, right, the network has always served the customer. But today, the network anticipates the customer. And so, what I mean by that is at scale, I can have these self healing networks, software defined networks that can flex, 10x capacity instantly, right? Think of a stadium experience, think of driverless cars, right? I need to be able to deploy an agent without the customer noticing that I have rerouted the network at runtime around a failure. And so, to me, the point I'm making is earlier, great CX used to mean answer the call faster, but now it is about the call never having to happen. So I would like to just conclude by saying, when you talk about experience, it is the visible customer experience that wins the moment, but it is the invisible experience that wins the trust of the customer and hence the lifetime value of what you retain.
Wow. I guess, we always talk about CX and then we forget that if the network is performing as it should be, then you would not be receiving that many calls and complaints in the first place. And therefore, your CX is sorted on its own. So you have rightly pointed out how now we can use AI on the end, on the network end. And like what you said with some of the use cases you've given, like, autonomous driving and, how do you manage the bandwidth needed in stadium events. I guess, yeah. So you make sure that, like what you said, we don't even have to anticipate those calls because you've managed to autonomously or automatically allocate what people need to manage their experience at all times. So yeah, sounds brilliant. And I think we wanted to talk about another interesting concept related to AI, which is the edge AI. So where does edge AI fit into this transformation, and how are telcos and ODMs benefiting from bringing intelligence closer to the customer?
That's such a this is a question that actually invigorates a lot of passion in me. So I'll actually, for your listeners, right, I'll try and make it simple, right? So before you get into edge AI, think of your listeners, looking at a football field and they see three rings around it, right? So the outermost ring is what I call as the cloud. You're running 400 meters or 1,000 meters, and that outside ring is where, when you deploy AI, you are not looking at instant responses, right? Areas like, you are generating customer analytics, network analytics that you want to maybe process a little later. You want to train AI models. And that is what telcos are doing with the cloud, right? So I would say that is the outermost ring. The second ring, I would say, is the network edge. And to me, this is the single biggest revenue opportunity for each of the telcos, right? When you think of today, any telco, right? You think of them as having a pipe through which all the data and traffic flows. If we can, and the telcos are already doing it, right? Look at the real estate in Manhattan, in California, that these telcos today carry, right? They have towers, they have base stations, they have nodes. And more and more, the intelligence is now revolving around the edge. We spoke about, let us say, the autonomous cars example, and I need access to compute capacity much closer. So if I can take all this real estate that the telcos have, and the telcos are the only ones who have it, I can actually take that pipe capacity and convert that into compute capacity, right? So compute, storage, so that any edge AI solution that needs the network, it can do that real time. If you think of the hyperscalers, they own the cloud. If you think of the ODMs, they own the device, but not the experience. But it is the telco, right, which owns all three components: the cloud, the network, and also, let us say, the device, and brings them all together. Cloud is where AI thinks, and the edge is where AI acts. And the telco is the only one that owns all three. Let's say, even within Cognizant, we own the Aston Martin partnership, right? We are partners to Aston Martin. And you cannot actually wait. And each car generates so much of data real time. And you really can't have a network that can go to the cloud and come back, right? You need network at the edge. And this is where, if you think of the autonomous car use case we discussed, think of a remote surgeon, think of an autonomous factory on the shop floor. These are all F1 cars that need instant responses. And I think telco, by moving away from, let us say, a pipe to a compute conversation, can really drive newer sources of revenue, right? Because they have that moat and no one else. And as far as devices, you already brought the point on ODMs. The ODMs win in this case as well, because when I think of the set-top boxes, the CPEs, the smartphones, how do I move away from selling hardware on margin to selling intelligence as a service, right? And I think that's where the ODMs would win as well.
Wow, interesting. I am really, I would say fascinated by the three rings, the way you described it. It's really clear, and I think so contextual. From the cloud and then the edge, and then you look at the device. So at the three layers, and rightly pointed out, cloud is where the thinking happens, and then the edge is where the action happens. And I think some of the examples you have given, autonomous factory, for example. Yeah, we need a lot of all that AI to be as close as possible, because these are the ultra low latency kind of use cases, and we can't afford all this data to go back to the to the main data center where it's processed, and then by the time it comes to the actual use case, we have already lost so much time, and all the those use cases will definitely not be able to make it. So I guess this term edge AI makes complete sense, and I think it really really describes what it is as it is. So fantastic. Yeah, it's interesting to note that telcos have a competitive edge in this scenario, because the way how you have pointed out, they have the cloud capabilities, they have the edge capabilities, and then of course they have direct access to every device. So I guess they have such an advantage in this game, and I guess that is why we call this era, this AI era, is definitely something that the telcos must capitalize on. But we also know, like what you pointed out at the very beginning of the conversation about the guardrails, right? And I think our next question has to do with the controls and the guardrails that need to be in place. So, we have an interesting scenario, and we would like, your thoughts on this. Like when you look at some of the use cases, we see scenarios where the agentic AI has to hand off to a human agent, and we know a lot of scenarios in CX, in network management and stuff like that. Looking at that kind of scenario, how do you design that transition so that it doesn't feel jarring to the customer? And what does a good human in the loop model look like?
That's an interesting question, right? So, firstly, I think handoff is a design problem, right? It's not a fallback mechanism. So, hey, AI is failing. Now I'm handing it over to human, right? So, and I think there are four signals that require a handoff. The first one I would say is, let's say it's a confidence collapse, right? The client, has completely lost confidence in what he's dealing with. And then, it needs to be handed off. And the number two signal I would say is if it's regulatory in nature, right? Hey, I'm handing over my health record, it's PII data. And now, there's regulation from EU and the US that you cannot push PII data into the LLM, right? The third could be emotion, right? I mean, I already had network call drops, my billing issues, and then I'm, dealing with a lifeless AI that is giving me the same answers. And at that point of the churn risk, you hand it off to the human, right? That is what I call as the human movement becoming human, right? So, and last but not the least, it's a customer choice, right? So I mean, some of us are, we figure out that we are talking to AI and we say, I need a person. And instantly we need to honor that, not send the customer through a maze, right? And so I would say those are the four signals for handoff. Now, if when you design the handoff, I would say there are five things that are important. The first and foremost, warm context, right? So if you as Tara is interacting with an agent, and that agent then becomes human, the human should inherit what I call as warm context, right? Full history, no repeating details, so the customer doesn't realize the difference. Second, I would say, is the visible takeover, right? You announce saying that to the customer that you are now talking to a human. But then the co-pilot does not go away, right? It stays in the background and it assists the agent, bringing the context and the analytics that is required to hand over the or solve the challenge, right? And finally, when it comes to decision rights, it should be unambiguous. The human is deciding, he can override AI. And last but not the least, I would say important to focus on loop closure. Once the call is complete, you retrain the AI models to make sure that next time when this happens, how do you avoid the problem statements? I would say these are maybe the 5 critical things for designing the handoff. And I would like to close with this, right? When you think of this handoff question that you raised, to me, AI handles the volume and humans handle moments that matter. And the customer should never feel the difference.
So, you listed the 5 steps, where we have how you look at the full history and context, and then you make when you are transitioning, you make it visible to the user that you're transitioning, and then, you ensure that the human gets to make their decision, and then you do the loop closure. So it's very interesting that we have such a structured way of how this transition happens, and it's very interesting when you say, "No, let's get AI to do the decisioning at the mass scale, but we keep those very important moments for humans."
Yeah.
So in this way, this because there's a lot of apprehension, admittedly, when people are dealing with AI, they sometimes like customers like you and me would definitely say that, yeah, just get me the human, I'm not going to talk to the machine anymore. But now when we see that how well the transitioning at the back end is being designed, so I guess we become more appreciative of the fact that organizations would have something so well designed in place to make sure the customer experience is seamless. We get the best of AI and then we get the best of human interaction.
Yeah. No, I couldn't summarize it better, Tara, right? The way, think of it this way, right? The goal isn't AI that never needs a human, right? It's AI knows exactly when it does. And I think you summarized it well. I think that's spot on.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, Vijay, I guess, that brings us to the end of the session. This is an interesting topic. We can basically, talk all day about this, but I think, we've covered like good ground on this session, and maybe we can reconnect and explore other topics. But till then, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights, especially on Cognizant's role in the AI and agentic AI space.
Absolutely, Tara. And I think I would say that, the telcos that win the next decade aren't the ones who bought the most AI. They will actually be the ones who build the best harness around, right? And leverage it to enterprise grade usage.
Okay, sounds great. Well, to everyone tuning in, thank you guys for listening. If you want to learn more, visit www.cognizant.com and follow us for more updates and insights as we continue to uncover the latest in technology and telecommunications. See you in our next session. Bye-bye.
Thank you.